I'd like now to have a bit of a conversation with Lisa Nisbet. Some of you may know, or many of you may know Lisa. She's an Alta Vista resident, but she's also an environmental psychology professor. So she brings expertise to this conversation in terms of human nature, connectedness, human motivation, environmental health, behavior, and affecting change. We thought that would be because some of this is sort of how we encourage people to pitch in and do their part, and how we change attitudes towards benefits. But I guess briefly, and maybe Lisa, you can first of all welcome, and briefly, what do you see as the key benefits of neighborhood trees?
Thanks so much, Carolyn. It's lovely to be part of this conversation. So thanks for inviting me. Yeah, and I should clarify too that I'm not an arborist or an ecologist. I study what I think are the most fascinating critters on the planet, which is human beings and their behavior, but mainly trying to understand how people differ in their connection to the natural environment and how that predicts things like psychological well-being or sustainable behavior. So I spend a lot of time trying to understand how nature can make people happier. Everybody wants to be happier. And I think, we've certainly seen that during the pandemic, that people are noticing nature more, they're noticing wildlife more, they're taking opportunities to get outside more, but it's not the same for everybody. So maybe in answering your question, I could sort of explain a little bit about what I know about why nature and trees are good for people, and then explain a little bit about maybe some of the challenges. So if you could just allow share screen, I've got a couple of illustrative slides because I like visuals, and sometimes I find when we see something like those wonderful maps of Ottawa's tree canopy, it really sort of helps us make it come alive. So I think what happens is that people sometimes will underestimate the benefits of trees. So this is just an example of some data that was put together by the Canadian Institute for Health Information a few years ago. And what they were looking at was how air quality and environmental health differed, not just from city to city, but from neighborhood to neighborhood. And I like looking at these slides to illustrate the importance of trees because, if we think about some of the benefits of trees, all of the wonderful ecosystem services that the arborist talked about last week, like managing floodwater runoff and improving air quality, maybe come to mind, but we might not think about how important they are for changing the whole character of a neighborhood and even the environmental conditions. So in a heat wave, which we've been getting more often, maybe some of you have had the experience of sort of trying to go for a walk and dash from tree to tree in a way on a really hot day. We may not realize just how much those trees contribute to the land surface temperature. So I like this data because it shows two different neighborhoods in Toronto. They did this in Montreal and a few Canadian cities. And what you see here is that the temperature is very different in these two neighborhoods. The dark colors, the purple and the red, indicate over 35 degrees, which, as most of us know, is really uncomfortable. But the interesting thing is when you start to think about, well, why that is, well, when you look at how those neighborhoods differ, you can see that the physical characteristics are quite different. So there's more tall buildings in the image on the left. There's more artificial surfaces like asphalt and concrete, and those don't absorb heat. So if you have more green space and more natural surfaces, more tree canopy like the image on the right, then what you get are fewer of these heat island effects. And that influences a lot of people's health. So, children that have asthma, seniors, elderly people, and people that don't have access to either air conditioning or green space to get outdoors. So some of this research was really trying to understand how there's inequalities in the amount of access people have to green space, but how that affects our cities. This is another nice illustrative slide, and I wanted to just sort of show this because what we see is that the people who are less wealthy tend to have less access to green space. And in terms of health benefits, we want everybody to live their best, healthiest life. We see the burden on the healthcare system when some people are suffering more than others. And so in Ottawa and so many other cities across Canada, when you look at by income level, how much access people have to green space, you can see that when people are less well off, they don't have access to dense vegetation, tree canopy. So that's a real problem. What does green space do for us? Well, there's a whole literature on this. Being near nature improves our mood, it reduces our blood pressure, it's associated with more relaxed brain states, helps our sleep patterns, but we may not really understand the effects on our physical and mental health. So some of the folks that do the most interesting research, I think, are these medical researchers in Japan, Korea, a little bit in Finland and Sweden as well, who look at how being near trees, so being immersed in nature, actually helps things like our immune functioning, how it reduces the stress response. And you see that again when people are going outside, sort of using nature for restoration during the pandemic. So it seems that trees and vegetation secrete these aromatic compounds called phytoncides. These are some of the mechanisms that have been studied. And that exposure to that type of greenery reduces the blood pressure. As I said, it boosts our mood, makes us feel more vital and alive. It also boosts natural killer cell activity, which is like, I like to think of this little sort of team of Jack Bauers patrolling our immune system for mutant viruses and cell growth. And when people spend time in these forested environments, they find that these natural killer cells, that activity is boosted for up to 2 months. So it helps us ward off the illness associated with chronic stress. So maybe I'll stop there because I could go on too long about the benefits of trees, but I think we had some other questions maybe you wanted to tap into.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Lisa. I'm sure we could have a whole session just, and I find it super interesting as well. And I think we've all become just so much more attuned to the importance of trees and green space and nature and our well-being in the last year or so. So yeah, super interesting topic. What I wanted to ask you though, the responses to the last few poll questions, from your professional standpoint, what I wonder if you can pick out a couple or whatever of these questions, and what do they suggest to you about general strategies that are likely to be more successful in making progress with respect to enhancing our tree canopy? Anything stand out for you there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as you said, the issue is probably most of us are really passionate about trees and we really value trees. But the question about, do you think your neighbors value trees? I think some folks weren't sure, and I frankly wasn't sure. I think that's sort of a challenge. And also the idea of, why do you think people aren't planting more trees or more supportive of that? There's a variety of factors there, but I think what jumped out was people aren't sure that they're going to be able to incorporate those trees into their home, or how it will affect other activities that are important to them, like gardening or being able to access sunshine. So I guess there's a couple of challenges there, because we always assume that, oh, if we just explain to people the importance of trees, everybody will plant trees and be for this. And of course, that seems logical, but we humans are very, very complicated. It doesn't always work that way, that when we explain why something is important, we just see behavior change. If that was the case, we'd all be getting enough sleep, we wouldn't be stressed, we'd be getting enough exercise, we wouldn't be drinking too much red wine or eating too much chocolate. All those things we know are really good for us, but we don't always do what's good for us. And understanding why is helpful. So it could be knowledge, right? If some people aren't even aware of how good trees are for the neighborhood or for their own personal health, I think that information is valuable. Some people may not feel like trees provide safety. They may have a misunderstanding of that. There's actually some really fascinating research done in the US showing that when people are randomly assigned to these housing projects, when people don't have a choice of where to live, some of these have a lot of green space around them and vegetation, some don't. When when people are living in these housing complexes with more greenery, there's actually less interpersonal violence. The crime rates are lower, not higher. So there's this misperception that having trees and greenery will make a less safe neighborhood. It's actually the opposite. It contributes to social capital. People feel like they trust their neighbors more, they get to know them more, they spend more time outside when there's a more interesting and dense vegetation and diversity around them. Yeah, so trees are really good for that. But again, if people don't have that knowledge, or they don't have the skills, or what we call self-efficacy, like if you don't even know how or where to get a tree and how to care for it, or your mobility doesn't allow you to do that, to go to the store, maybe you don't have a car to buy soil and nutrients. And I think those are challenges that we need to understand so that people have support. So the question about who's responsible for trees, I'm one of those people that said not sure, because I don't feel like it's just my responsibility or my neighbors. I don't think my neighbors would be too happy if I said, your responsibility to grow a tree, look after it. I think we need to make it a collective responsibility. So the support needs to be there. The city needs to help us and provide education and maybe some of the tools. And then also individuals who are able to need to maybe take action as well and create sort of a social norm so that it's more commonplace and people understand that having trees in your neighborhood is actually beneficial. But there's a whole bunch of pieces there. It's a little bit of knowledge. It's a little bit of maybe confidence or self-efficacy and understanding how to look after the tree. And then it's also overcoming some of those misperceptions. Because I think we think trees are wonderful from sort of the ecosystem perspective, but we really don't understand how important they are to individual health, like our physical health, our mental health, our well-being. It's the air we breathe. There's lots of interesting research where, they follow the loss of tree canopy as a result of emerald ash borer in a community, and cardiovascular disease rates go up when that happens. So there's so many links to tree canopy and vegetation and human physical and mental health that I think most of us don't think about it. We don't think about how it affects us individually.
Really interesting. You've already touched on a number of ideas. I was going to ask you if you had any specific, I was going to put you on the spot a little bit and ask if you had any specific suggestions or ideas about, and you mentioned a collective responsibility, but how as a community or as communities we could make progress on getting people to plant and nurture trees on their own property, as well as nurturing those street trees, also trees that are planted on city property. But I'm not too sure that I very often in, say, my neighborhood see people watering. I see them watering maybe trees that they've planted on their own property, but I don't very often see them, pulling the garden hose that much farther or putting mulch around a newly planted city tree. They sort of say, well, that's the city's responsibility. So maybe there's some additional things that we can. But you talked a lot about as well, I guess, just social norms and the importance. Once you provide people with the information, that's a given, but also the social norms that need to change. And makes me think about our attitude towards smoking or not smoking and how that has evolved. Recycling. There's so many things that have evolved. And so, do you have any ideas or any potential guidance on how we can think about that and what we can do in our own communities?
I think being a role model is really helpful too. I can use an example of gardening. It used to be that everybody had their quite uniform patch of grass, but you're starting to see more and more front lawns replaced by gardens, shrubs, trees, mulch, xeriscaping that doesn't require watering. And partly that's due to all the salt damage, that the lawns get from the plows and things. But it's also, I think, an understanding of maybe it's a better way to do things, and it provides an aesthetically pleasing, neighborhood. But when you're the first person on the street to do it, people sort of think that you're a freak. Look at that weird house with the garden that doesn't have the lawn. But then after a while, people start to notice, and maybe somebody else maybe does the first 3 inches they put in some garden or some some nice ground cover. And then a couple other people think, okay, well, maybe I could try that. So I think within a community, right, we can role model, and maybe there's people that are comfortable taking on stewardship roles or being leaders. One thing that doesn't work is when we have rules imposed on us by others. Even when things are good for us, people don't like being told what to do. So I think the more that we can talk amongst each other and work on solutions and focus on some of the positives, that'll really help inspire people. It'll give people confidence who maybe don't know how to plant a tree or what kind of tree to plant. They'll see that others in their community are doing that. There may be public events where people could go and learn to garden or plant some trees. And that idea of caring for a city tree or a street tree, if you don't have your own trees, could be a wonderful way to reconnect people with nature. So there's tons of literature on how this connection to the natural world helps our mental and physical health. And unfortunately, most of us spend our time indoors, 90% of our time spent inside. So finding ways to, encourage people to get outdoors, to be part of their community, connecting with other people is really good for us too. I think probably most of us are enjoying hearing from others today and meeting neighbors. But connecting with our neighborhood, finding out what are the plants and animals that we share our ecosystem with. We can't care about what we don't know and understand. So finding ways to just learn about what is that species of tree, right? You can't protect a tree or grow a tree, but you can protect or understand a red oak and understand the kind of soil it needs and the kind of leaves that grow from it and what kind of wonderful birds and mammals it supports. So I think the more we can foster that connection with the world around us, it actually helps us connect with each other and will make us happier and healthier people.
That's great. Thank you so much.